I'm going to regale you today with some war stories from a prior law enforcement career I had. Let's talk suicides today. Just, it's tragic, it's sad, um, but it's part of life. And, people that commit suicide, it's a complex issue. I always used to think, those are just the most selfish people to do that to their families and leave behind all that carnage for folks to have to deal with, the emotional trauma. But, as you mature, you recognize it's more complex than that. I want to tell you about a 19-year-old man that in the 90s, our department served him with a restraining order on his girlfriend. I can't remember the exact circumstances of what he'd done, but she got an emergency order, and supervisor, another officer, went and served it to him. He lived down the street from his girlfriend. Well, later that night, he took his daddy's 410 shotgun out of a cabinet, loaded it, went down to her house and began knocking on her window. He was crying, drunk. We really don't know what his intentions would have been because he didn't live through the night. She called us immediately. I was just getting off duty, so the two officers that were coming on duty immediately responded to the house, and I was a little bit further behind. And as soon as they parked their cars and ran down the driveway, they heard a loud bang in a car behind them. It was this young man. He had taken that 410 and placed it in front of his face and pulled the trigger, single slug. Blew out his brain out the back of his head into the back seat. And he was dead. And just a real tragic thing. The detective came in, asked who would be willing to help film the scene. Oh, that's right, the detective didn't come in. After we explained the situation, asked if someone would be willing to just film the scene for him, videotape it. He'd come in the morning. So I volunteered to stay on duty longer to film it. I had not filmed a suicide before. I just felt it was important for experience sake. As the coroner showed up and the two men pulled the body out of the car, I'll never forget as they laid him down on the ground, his face just collapsed in on itself, just kind of pancaked in. All the bone structure was gone from the middle of his face, where where the slug had gone into his face, and just face just kind of collapsed in on itself. It's like something you'd see in a movie. One of the other things you recognize when you've been around dead bodies is when the spirit has flown, it's just an empty shell. It doesn't even seem human. It is, but our spirits just really are what enliven us, make us who we are. And when that spirit's gone, to what's next? It just seems like an empty shell left behind, like a husk, like a tent with all the residents that have left. And anyway, you kind of develop a little sense of dark humor when you're in public safety. Kind of helps you cope in the moment with the emotions that you deal with from seeing hard things. So there's a little bit of inappropriate humor, which usually comes up. I'll never forget that in the back seat, his brain had landed on a little toy stuffed animal. It was a crash dummy, kind that you would see like in the commercials back in the day, where like this crash dummy would be on a car, and kind of like they put in a car that they'd smash into a wall, like a dealership or something, like online to show you how safe the car was in an accident. But it was a miniature version of that. His brain had pretty much landed out the back of his head, right on that little crash dummy. I don't know. It doesn't even sound funny now when I talk about it, but it's funny at the time. But sad story. Had the next day, we decided not to wake up the family that night to deliver the death notification. No sense waking up mom and dad at 1 in the morning and delivering news like that. Maybe wait 7 or 8 hours till daylight. So we did. And that next morning, a supervisor and I went to the house, and he let me, I'd never done a death notification. He let me do it, kind of coached me a little, made sure that I understood, when they've got multiple children, don't just say your son has passed away. Use a name, be direct. And we also had an ambulance standing by just because the mother was known to have a heart condition. So I delivered the death notification. They reacted as any parent would. Mom had an episode. We needed to call the paramedics in. She got transported for observation. It's really just nervous breakdown. And just a really, really tragic story. 19 years old, taking your own life. One other war story regarding suicide. Woman looked to be in her 40s, 50s, I'd say. She and her husband were RVing down at a park. She had been really grieving the last year over a daughter that had died in a car accident. And she just couldn't get over the grief. And while her husband had gone out of the RV for something, she took his .357 Magnum revolver, put it in her mouth, and pulled the trigger. I didn't go to the scene for that accident. I ended up following the body to the morgue. They called out the medical examiner for initial examination, as they usually do when someone's been killed by gunshot. Never forget the medical examiner just pointing out all the different ways he knew that she had been killed by a gunshot. There's scoring in her mouth from the gases, and not to mention her eyeball had completely popped out of one side of her head and was hanging on like a fleshy cord. And I'll never forget thinking how huge the eyeball is out of the socket. I mean, at the time, it seemed like a pool cue to me. A pool ball, like you play pool with. Probably smaller, but at the time, it seemed that big. That's a macabre thing. And then he started shifting around. I was fine with that until he started shifting around the plates under her hair of her head where the bullet had exited and shattered her skull. Ugh, that was hard. Seeing pieces of the head move. And, as medical examiners go, they've got a way about them that's just creepy. And they like to freak out whoever's there by showing them different things. That's just their humor. But that's just a couple war stories on suicide. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of those situations. It's just a reality that when you're in public safety, you come across situations like that. Involved in shootings. You arrest people that have just committed murders. You show up at people's houses in the middle of domestic disturbances and get into fights. You arrest drunks. Lots of war stories. But as always, I think it's important not to use names, even though it's been 20, 25 years. Not to say the names of the agencies. I wouldn't want to hurt any of those families if they ever saw a video of mine. But that's the reality of serving in those roles. And you learn a lot about life when you work a job like that. You learn about human nature. You learn that people aren't basically good, honestly. People aren't bent always toward the right. That doesn't mean there's not good in humanity. That just means you get your eyes open, you become a realist, maybe a little bit of a pessimist about human nature. I do believe people are redeemable. I'm a Christian, so I'm a big believer in people changing. But I also understand what human nature's like. You've seen some of the worst of it. Also seen some of the best of it. But, well, that's it for now. Y'all take care now. Till next time.